She vanished quietly, as if dissolving into thin air. She left behind her home, her children, and unfinished conversations. For those close to her, it was a shock. Jamie Haggard would never have disappeared without an explanation. Week after week, the search gave way to despair, and then to horror. A forest trail, a suitcase, the acrid scent of something burned. Questions multiplied, yet answers remained elusive. What happened to Jamie? Who could have done such a thing? This story begins with a shadow but unravels a mystery that will leave everyone shaken. Jamie Haggard, a young woman from the small town of Kenmore, Washington, was known for her kind-hearted nature and unwavering devotion to her family. Her life was fraught with challenges, yet she never gave up on her dream of building a stable future for her daughters. Despite her struggles, Jamie maintained warm relationships with many of those around her and worked hard to keep her optimism intact. By 2016, Jamie was living with her stepbrother, David Haggard. The family was caught in a web of difficulties, financial strain, tense familial relationships, and a pervasive sense of uncertainty. While she shared a bond with her stepbrother, their relationship was far from harmonious. Some of Jamie's acquaintances claimed she feared David, suspecting him of having a violent streak. A devoted mother to her two daughters, Jamie's life revolved around caring for them. However, she rarely confided in others, making it difficult for anyone to truly understand her emotional state. Even with these complexities, her sudden disappearance in 2016 shocked everyone who knew her. Her children, friends, and neighbors later described Jamie as someone who would never abandon her daughters without reason. This became a cornerstone of the initial investigation into her disappearance. Jamie appeared to be an ordinary woman living in a quiet suburb. Yet beneath the veneer of stability lay dark family secrets that began to surface only after she went missing. June 9, 2016, began like any other day for Jamie Haggard. Her children were at home, and her stepbrother David was occupied with his own activities. None of the neighbors noticed anything unusual. However, by evening, Jamie had vanished without a trace. When her loved ones tried to contact her, Jamie's phone was turned off, something entirely out of character for her, as she always stayed reachable for her daughters. At first, her friends and family assumed she might have left for personal reasons, but her sudden silence raised alarm. A few days later, Jamie's worried mother reported her disappearance to the police. She revealed that in the months leading up to the incident, Jamie had expressed concerns about her relationship with David. According to her mother, David often displayed aggressive behavior, and Jamie feared it could one day lead to tragedy. At the time, however, these fears were mere suspicions, with no concrete evidence for the police to act upon. Initial searches yielded no results. Investigators searched the home where Jamie lived but found no signs of a struggle or violence. Questioning neighbors and acquaintances failed to clarify the situation. The only clue came from a few witnesses who claimed to have seen Jamie near her home on the day she disappeared. One reported spotting her with a man whose appearance resembled David's. In the first weeks after her disappearance, the police were unable to officially name David as a suspect. His statements seemed consistent, and he maintained that he had no knowledge of his sister's whereabouts. However, investigators noticed peculiarities in his demeanor. He appeared to avoid discussing Jamie and often gave evasive answers. As days turned into weeks, the worry among Jamie's friends and family grew. She remained missing, with no communication or traces left behind. Her disappearance was a complete mystery, and law enforcement continued to search for even the smallest lead that might shed light on what had happened. Following the report of Jamie Haggard's disappearance, the Snohomish County Police intensified their search efforts. Investigators began by examining Jamie's social circle, paying particular attention to her family. David Haggard, her stepbrother, immediately drew police scrutiny. However, he insisted he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. While investigators probed the circumstances, Jamie's friends and family launched their own search efforts. They posted flyers with her photo, organized volunteer groups, and combed through the surrounding areas. Everyone who knew Jamie agreed she would never leave her daughters behind voluntarily. This belief became a driving force in the pursuit of the truth. Detectives concentrated on piecing together the final weeks of Jamie's life. They uncovered that in the months prior to her disappearance, Jamie had frequently mentioned the strained relationship with David. She described him as prone to anger over trivial matters, and his behavior instilled a growing sense of fear. Some friends reported that Jamie was even considering moving to escape the tension with her stepbrother. However, there was no direct evidence linking David to Jamie's disappearance. Moreover, he maintained an air of composure, suggesting that she might have left of her own accord. Despite this, police documented inconsistencies in his account, such as discrepancies in dates and timelines. A significant step in the investigation involved tracing Jamie's electronic footprint. Detectives attempted to track her phone, but it had been powered off. The last recorded signal originated near her home, which offered little clarity but confirmed suspicions that her disappearance likely occurred close by. The investigation faced obstacles. David continued to live in the shared house and outright refused to grant permission for a more thorough search. Without a warrant, the police were unable to conduct an extensive examination of the property, delaying progress. This limitation frustrated Jamie's relatives, who increasingly doubted David's sincerity. With each passing day, the hope of finding Jamie alive dwindled. Yet, law enforcement remained determined to uncover the truth. All they needed was one critical piece of evidence to break the case open. As the investigation deepened, detectives increasingly focused on David Haggard. Jamie's relatives and friends described a relationship that had grown increasingly tense in the months leading up to her disappearance. They recounted incidents where David displayed aggression, and Jamie often confided her fear of being alone in the house with him. A close friend emerged as a key witness, revealing that Jamie had expressed a desire to move out multiple times. However, her financial dependence on David and his control over their shared resources kept her trapped. This detail became increasingly significant as suspicions mounted. In May 2016, just a month before her disappearance, Jamie confided in a friend that she feared for her life. She worried that her conflicts with David might escalate into something far worse. Though these concerns had not been documented previously, they later became a vital part of the case. David, meanwhile, maintained that he had no knowledge of Jamie's whereabouts. He insisted she might have left voluntarily, citing personal issues she allegedly kept hidden from others. Yet these claims struck detectives as implausible, given the numerous testimonies about Jamie's devotion to her daughters and her reluctance to leave them without explanation. Adding to the suspicions were changes in David's behavior after Jamie's disappearance. Neighbors reported that he had become reclusive, and on several occasions, a strange smell was noticed emanating from his home. However, without a warrant, police were unable to search the property thoroughly. Over time, the mounting tension around the case prompted investigators to seek court approval for a search of the house Jamie had shared with David. However, the request was denied, as there was no direct evidence implicating him. The lack of new leads created an atmosphere of frustration and despair. Detectives understood, however, that if David were truly involved, he would likely make a mistake eventually. Over the following months, they kept a close watch, waiting for any opportunity to uncover the truth about Jamie's fate. 2 years after Jamie Haggard's disappearance, in May 2018, the case took an unexpected and grim turn. In a wooded area near a highway in Snohomish County, hunters discovered a suitcase. Inside were charred and dismembered human remains, immediately drawing the attention of authorities. A forensic examination confirmed the worst fears: the remains belonged to Jamie Haggard. The cause of death was determined to be violent, and the condition of the body indicated that the perpetrator had tried to conceal the crime using fire. The suitcase, investigators found, had once belonged to David Haggard. For Jamie's family, the discovery was devastating. They had clung to hope that she was still alive despite the years of silence. Now, they faced the harsh reality that her story had ended in tragedy, sparking a new chapter, one focused on justice. The discovery of Jamie's remains became a pivotal moment in the investigation. It allowed police to intensify their efforts to uncover the circumstances of her murder. David, already under suspicion, became the primary focus. However, he avoided arrest in the months that followed, as police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Detectives worked to piece together the sequence of events that led to Jamie's remains being left in the woods. Analysis of the suitcase and the remains suggested they had been abandoned shortly after her disappearance. The location was not far from a route David frequently traveled, further raising suspicion. A crucial piece of evidence was a length of rope found near the body. Forensic experts determined that the material matched rope previously seen in David's home. Yet, even this wasn't enough to warrant an immediate arrest. Investigators continued building their case, determined to connect the dots. Meanwhile, the public, horrified by the grim discovery, began pressuring authorities for justice. Local residents and activists demanded accountability for Jamie's death, and her name became a rallying cry for the fight against domestic violence. The emergence of new physical evidence became a turning point for the case. Investigators knew they had to leave no stone unturned to bring closure to Jamie's family and ensure her killer faced justice. By October 2019, investigators had gathered enough evidence to arrest David Haggard. Police charged him with second-degree murder in the case of Jamie Haggard. The decision to detain him came after months of meticulous work, including evidence analysis, witness interviews, and a thorough review of all data related to the case. A critical breakthrough came when physical evidence from the scene matched items found in David's home. Experts confirmed that the suitcase containing Jamie's remains had belonged to him. Furthermore, fingerprints on the rope used to bind her body were identified as David's. These findings were pivotal in securing a warrant for his arrest. David was apprehended at his home, where he denied all charges. He claimed he knew nothing about Jamie's death and suggested that someone was trying to frame him. However, his behavior raised suspicions. He appeared overly anxious, contradicted himself, and struggled to provide a clear account of his whereabouts on the day Jamie disappeared. Interrogations with David became a cornerstone of the investigation. Video recordings of these sessions, later made public, revealed how detectives methodically questioned him about his relationship with Jamie and the events of June 9, 2016. At one point, David displayed visible irritation when confronted with the discovery of Jamie's remains, further fueling suspicions of his involvement. Meanwhile, investigators continued gathering additional evidence. Neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances of David were interviewed. Several recalled him complaining about Jamie and their frequent arguments. These testimonies strengthened the prosecution's case. David's arrest marked a significant step forward, but proving his guilt in court remained a formidable challenge. Prosecutors prepared to present the evidence they believed definitively implicated him. Jamie's family received the news of the arrest with a mixture of relief and resolve, knowing it was only the beginning of their pursuit of justice. The public, deeply invested in the case, followed developments closely. Jamie's story reignited conversations about domestic violence, systemic inaction, and the protracted nature of criminal investigations. Her case became a stark reminder of the importance of addressing warning signs within families. The next stage was the trial, where the prosecution would need to convince a jury of David's guilt and ensure he faced justice for Jamie's death. David Haggard's trial began in mid-2022 with the charge of second-degree murder for the killing of Jamie Haggard. The case drew widespread public attention as the community awaited the resolution of a tragedy that had haunted them for years. The prosecution presented a comprehensive narrative based on physical evidence and witness testimony. Central to their case were key pieces of evidence: the suitcase containing Jamie's remains, the rope bearing David's fingerprints, and forensic analysis indicating that fire had been used to destroy evidence. Prosecutors emphasized David's control over the home Jamie lived in and his access to the items used in the crime. Video recordings of David's interrogations became a focal point of the trial. In them, he repeatedly contradicted himself, avoided direct questions, and appeared increasingly agitated when asked about Jamie's remains. Prosecutors argued that his behavior betrayed a sense of guilt. They also highlighted his well-documented conflicts with Jamie, suggesting a clear motive for the crime. David's defense centered on denying involvement. His lawyers argued that the evidence was circumstantial and insufficient to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They suggested that the suitcase could have been planted and that the rope, accessible to many, did not conclusively tie David to the crime. The defense also painted David as a victim of public bias, claiming the case against him was built on assumptions rather than facts. The trial's emotional peak came with the testimonies of Jamie's friends and family. Witnesses recounted her fear of David and his volatile nature. Jamie's mother gave a heartfelt statement, describing her daughter's dedication to her children and asserting that she would never have left them willingly. Her words left a profound impression on the jury. Forensic experts provided critical insights in the final days of the trial. They confirmed that Jamie's remains had been left in the woods shortly after her disappearance and that evidence pointed to the murder occurring near her home. These conclusions aligned with the prosecution's timeline of events. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. Their verdict would bring closure to a case that had spanned years, leaving Jamie's family, the public, and law enforcement on edge as they awaited the outcome. In October 2022, the jury delivered its verdict. David Haggard was found guilty of the second-degree murder of his stepsister, Jamie Haggard. The decision came after days of deliberation, during which jurors carefully reviewed all presented evidence, including physical items, witness testimonies, and expert analyses. For Jamie's family, this was a pivotal moment. After 6 years of uncertainty and a relentless fight for justice, they finally had an answer. Yet, while the verdict brought a measure of closure, it could not undo the loss her children and loved ones endured. In December 2022, the sentencing hearing took place. The judge sentenced David to 15 years in prison, emphasizing the severity of his crime but also taking into account his lack of prior criminal convictions. While the prosecution and Jamie's family considered the sentence fair, some in the community felt it was too lenient given the nature of the crime. Jamie's mother, close friends, and activists who had followed the case from the beginning attended the hearing. In her statement to the court, Jamie's mother said, "I hoped this day would never come, but now we know the truth. My daughter deserves so much more than what life gave her. We hope her story serves as a lesson for others." Throughout the trial and sentencing, David maintained his composure, showing little emotion. In his final statement, he reiterated his claim of innocence. His lawyers later filed an appeal, arguing that the evidence against him remained circumstantial and that public opinion had unduly influenced the verdict. However, prosecutors maintained that the evidence presented left no doubt of his guilt. As public interest in the case began to fade, its impact lingered. The story of Jamie Haggard became a sobering reminder of how unaddressed family conflicts can escalate into tragedy. Her case prompted widespread discussions in the media, social networks, and community forums about the importance of recognizing and addressing domestic violence. For Jamie's family, the next stage was learning to live with her absence while holding on to the justice they had fought so hard to achieve. Her daughters, now in the care of their grandmother, grew up cherishing the memory of their mother, whose strength and love for them became a guiding light in their lives. The case of Jamie Haggard left an indelible mark on those who knew her and on the history of Snohomish County. It served as a stark example of how unresolved family tensions can spiral into tragedy if left unchecked. Despite the pain of loss, Jamie's family, friends, and community drew lessons from her story, using them to prevent similar situations in the future. In honor of Jamie, her family established a foundation bearing her name. The foundation supported victims of domestic violence and conducted educational outreach. Schools in the county began hosting lectures to teach students how to recognize signs of abuse and seek help. Jamie's mother often said during her speeches, if someone had helped Jamie earlier, things might have turned out differently. The publicity surrounding Jamie's case also captured the attention of lawmakers. Several politicians and law enforcement officials advocated for stronger measures to prevent domestic violence. Proposals included streamlining the process for obtaining search warrants to enable faster police response to potential threats. Many of these initiatives were inspired by the family's determination to achieve justice for Jamie. For Jamie's daughters, her death was a profound loss. Yet, with the support of their grandmother and community, they grew up knowing their mother as a brave and loving woman who did everything she could for their happiness. The family worked tirelessly to provide them with care and stability, ensuring they had the chance to heal. David Haggard, convicted of his sister's murder, remained in prison, where he was serving his 15-year sentence. His name was never spoken again in the house where Jamie once lived. To the family, he was a reminder of the dangers of ignoring toxic relationships, even within the bounds of family. Jamie Haggard's story became a symbol of the fight for justice and the need to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Her death inspired many people in similar situations to seek help and to voice their fears. Though Jamie is no longer here, her name lives on, carried by those whose lives were changed by the lessons of her story. The case is closed, but Jamie's memory endures. Her life and the struggle for truth and justice by those who loved her serve as a lasting reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of standing up for those in need.